Welcome to our next session. Drag is a form of protest. I'm Lael Hoyden, your friendly neighborhood historical deviant. And you can put a comment if you have a question. We'll have some time at the end for questions. If you have any, just put it in the comments and I'll be able to answer any questions from there. So here we go. So before Stonewall, there was Gladys Bentley, Jose Sarria, William Dorsey Swan, Fanny and Stella, and Princess Serafina. Since Stonewall, there is the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, Bob the Drag Queen, Alex Newell, and Glee. Hello, as I said, my name is Lael Hoyden, your friendly neighborhood historical deviant. I love sharing stories from history. I love reclaiming queer history that has been stratified. I love exploring where our language comes from and where the events that we hold so dear come from. So that's going to be explored somewhat in this, but there's so many other stories that I just couldn't touch on because I was only given, a little bit of time. It would take me months to share everything with you, probably years or decades. But I just love to tell the stories of history. So drag has been around since people have been around. From ancient times to today, drag uses clothes, makeup, and other aspects of behavior to create heightened versions of masculinity, femininity, and other forms of gender expression to represent freedom of expression and resistance to unjust forces. Drag artists always highlight important social issues, such as gender inequality, housing insecurity, stigma around HIV/AIDS, anti-LGBTQ plus violence and economic disenfranchisement. I've always have a problem with that word. Drag and protest can be found everywhere. But for today, I've taken the stories from history that I wanted to share with you and have put them in 4 categories. So they're under poetry, song and dance, costume, and revolution. And all the stories also intersect because a lot of what happens in our community intersects with one another. It doesn't fit neatly into any boxes. It's just the way of our wonderful queer world. So let's begin with poetry. In times of protest, in times of oppression, it is often in the poetic creation that people can express themselves and can creatively highlight oppression that lives on forever. And this is the case in this poem from the 10th century. The poem was originally written in Old English and highlights the drag language of gender and gender roles and gender identity. The poem's called The Wife's Lament. And thankfully, Toronto writer Andre Babin translated it into our English, modern English, because I can't read Old English as much as I'd like to. So the poem is called The Wife's Lament, and it is a tongue-in-cheek look at gender roles of the wife and husband. The poem in the 10th century would have been performed by a man in drag. I sing this song full of sadness, the song which is myself. I will tell what I am able about what hardships I have faced since I grew up, recently or long ago, never more than now. Always I suffer my misery of exile in this house without joy. Very often my cruel departure takes hold of me. Friends live on earth, lying in beds with their beloveds, while I, in the time before dawn, alone, under an oak tree, in earth's chest, I sit many long summer days, weeping for the misery of exile. My many hardships I will never be able to rest from my mind's grief, nor from all the longing in this life takes hold of me. It may be that he is always sorrowful, his heart thought stern. Perhaps he has a joyful demeanor next to his grief. It's constant sorrowful tumult, whether he is dependent on himself for all his worldly joy, or whether is he an outcast, very far from his destined country, sitting under stone cliffs, frost-rimmed from storms, friendless, water flowing before his echoing home. My lover suffers much grief of my mind. Too often he remembers a house of joy. Woe to those that must of longing in this life abide. I love that one. And I wrote this one for this presentation. And it's called These Shoes. These shoes tell a story. Shoes for dancing in hidden away places, away from police raids and shotgun aims. Shoes for marching in peaceful protests, silent, willing change to happen. They say shoes make an outfit. Well then, honey, these shoes are made to slay. Shoes that for decades held identity safe, until one day I can fly, lifted by the shoes, moving on the journey. The shoes say, now love, we walk. I really love sharing imagery and ideas in poetry. For me, there's a freedom of expression in the words that are written on a page. It's easier for me to express myself in writing than it is in any other way. And it's a great medium to challenge the status quo and make people think. Poems can disarm people because many don't see it as a form of protest, even when it is. And the poem I shared with you is a personal one because for many years, I did not share my identity, only in my shoes. And so that's why I wrote these shoes, because my shoes were how I shared my gender identity as a queer, non-binary person. So song and dance, so much fun. Glee was a television show that ran from 2009 to 2015. It dealt with many different issues, and I wanted to highlight one here. That was when the character named Wade wanted to come out as a drag queen named Unique. And it was through his conversations with two other characters, Kurt and Mercedes, that Unique was urged to be themselves. And they were given a pair of sparkly high-heeled sandals. And so Wade had the courage to come out as Unique. And they did so at a show choir concert. And this was the first time that Unique was born. Unique became a permanent character on the show. And Alex Newell, who played Wade, Unique, has gone on to use their platform to raise awareness of trans rights, as well as performing on Broadway in drag, and even winning a Tony. William Dorsey Swan. I love William Dorsey Swan. In the 1880s, William Dorsey Swan, who was a formerly enslaved person from Virginia, became the first self-proclaimed drag queen. He held drag balls in Washington, D.C. It isn't quite clear when he began the drag balls, maybe as early as 1882, but they were in full swing by 1887. At the various houses in the DuPont area of Washington, Swan and his acquaintances, many of them formerly enslaved, traded their uniforms as cooks, waiters, and servants for the sumptuous silks and satins of the ball gowns. They would come wearing corsets and bustles, long hose, and slippers. In the latest fashions, invitations were circulated secretly to trusted acquaintances and by word of mouth to locations like the YMCA. Attendees arrived under cover of night, stepping out of carriages to mingle with friends, refreshments in hand. So the central part of the Swans drag balls was the prizes for a dance, usually a cakewalk. Sound familiar? Maybe legendary, or a pose, which had started in the plantations. Actually, they used to do cakewalks then when they were enslaved people. It was improvisation, the use of movement as communication. The cakewalks, the Swans parties, were the precursor for voguing in today's ballroom culture. The winners were crowned as the queens of the drag ball, and it is certain where the title came. But Joseph proposes that Swan lifted up the queens of liberty, as he observed in Washington's Emancipation Day parades, Black women perched on flowery floats to personify African Americans' newfound freedom. Drag came from the having to drag your long dresses along with you. And that's where we get the word drag. At least that's what historians believe is where it came from. But it could also be a corruption of the grand rag, which was an antiquated term for the masquerade ball. What is certain is that William Dorsey Swan was the first to proclaim himself and others queen of a drag. While the parties were a rare chance for queer men, and there's no concrete evidence that women attended, to enjoy themselves and foster community, the views of the public were much less benign. The police crashed drags whenever they were tipped off by a neighbor, with the names of those arrested at the parties published in the newspaper, sometimes next to lurid details in the next morning's paper. Members of the House of Swan knew that they faced jail time as well as the possibility of economic and social ruin from being outed. In April 1888, the police came to the door of where the drag ball was happening, and Swan ran to block its entry with his own body, giving an attitude of royal defiance, and so that others could get out safely and escape before the police could catch them, so that they wouldn't have to face humiliation. In the capital, Swan's legacy nonetheless lived on. His brother Daniel, who was arrested at more than one of William's drag balls, a tailor, continued to provide women's clothing for Washington's drag scene until 1954. The House of Swan might credibly be called the forerunner of all modern ballroom culture, which follows the same basic structure William developed. Chosen families led by queens and mothers who officiate at beauty and dance competitions. The drag ball continues today, thanks to William Dorsey Swan, who would not be shut down or silenced. And there's a drag ball. Costume. In the 18th century in England, Princess Seraphina fought for gay rights. Born as John Cooper, Princess Seraphina was a constant visitor to the Molly houses. Molly houses are safe houses where gay men lived and could interact with one another. Princess Seraphina was known to perform marriage ceremonies for the men at the Molly houses. And the men even went through the acts of having a baby together as a married couple. Princess Seraphina is a mysterious figure because they were able to evade arrest at a time of rampant arrests under the Sodomy Act, where men who were arrested lost everything, sometimes even losing their lives by being hung. Princess Seraphina continued to fight for gay rights throughout their life. I'm going to take a sip of water. Fanny and Stella, also known as Ernest Bolton and Frederick Park. They were arrested for using the women's bathroom in the 19th century England. They were examined at a police station by the official gender decider. What a job, gender decider. And they were defined as men. Their court case was a sensational story, with one newspaper using feminine pronouns to describe them. The court did not want to prosecute them, even though they were resolute in their identities. They were convicted on a lesser charge and found innocent of sodomy. Their case lives up the topic of gender-neutral bathrooms and not conforming to strict gender laws. These two alternated their clothing from male to female. During the trial, both supporters and detractors were in states of gender confusion, not knowing which pronouns to use for them. And those reporting and taking notes weren't sure how to describe them, as they did not have the language we have today. Their story has helped gay rights and conversations around gender identity forward. After the trial and the conviction, they continued to dress in male and female clothes until their deaths. Gladys Bentley. Gladys Bentley lived between 1907 and 1960 and was a blues pianist, singer, performer, and drag king pioneer. In her top hat and tuxedo, Bentley belted gender-bending original blues numbers and lewd parodies of popular songs, eventually becoming Harlem royalty. When not accompanying herself on a dazzling piano, the mightily built singer often swept through the audience, flirting with women in the crowd, soliciting dirty lyrics from them as she sang. By the 1930s, Bentley was Harlem's most famous lesbian figure, a significant distinction, given that gay, lesbian, and gender-defying writers and performers were flourishing during the Harlem Renaissance. For a time, she was among the best-known Black entertainers in the United States. Bentley sang her bawdy, bossy songs in a thunderous voice, dipping down into a frog-like growl, or curling upward to a wail. In his 1940 autobiography, Langston Hughes called her an amazing exhibition of musical and energy, a large, dark, masculine lady whose feet pounded the floor while her fingers pounded the keyboard, a perfect piece of African sculpture animated by her own rhythm. In a letter to County Cullen, the Harlem socialite Harold Jackman wrote, "When Gladys sings St. James Infirmary, it makes you weep your heart out." Indeed, Bentley knew her success was built on talent as much as notoriety. The world had tramped to the doors of the places where I have performed to applaud my piano playing and song silence, she wrote in 1952 in Ebony magazine. Even though they knew me as a male impersonator, they still could appreciate my artistry as a performer. Revolution. Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera. Marsha P. Johnson was born on August 24, 1945, in Elizabeth, New Jersey. She was identified as male at birth. However, she enjoyed wearing clothes made for girls. But after she was sexually assaulted as a child, she stopped wearing girls' clothes. It was only after graduating high school she moved to New York City with only $15 and a bag of clothes, and she began dressing exclusively in women's clothing and adopted the full name of Marsha P. Johnson. And the P stood for Pay It No Mind. To her, this was a life motto and a response to questions about her gender. Today, historians and former friends of Marsha describe her as a trans woman. During her lifetime, the term transgender was not commonly used. She described herself as a gay person, a transvestite, and a drag queen. And she used she, her pronouns. Marcia was part of a growing community of LGBTQ+ youth who sought acceptance in New York City. But in the 1950s and the 1960s, LGBTQ+ rights were strictly limited. For example, dancing with a person of the same sex, as well as cross-dressing, was illegal. It was difficult for her to find work. She realized that the fastest way to make money was to hustle, which meant she was a sex worker. The work, due to stigmatization of sex workers, was incredibly dangerous. She often found herself alone with strangers in hotel rooms and cars. Sometimes the strangers were violent. On multiple occasions, clients pulled guns on Marcia, and once she was even shot. She spent most of her life without a permanent home. She slept in hotel rooms, restaurants, and movie theaters, and sometimes lived with friends. So not long after she moved to New York City, 17-year-old Marcia met 11-year-old Sylvia Rivera. Sylvia was a Puerto Rican trans woman who was also new to New York. The two became instant friends. Marcia taught Sylvia how to apply makeup, live on the street, and look out for trouble. She also encouraged Sylvia to love herself and her identity. Marcia enjoyed expressing herself through her appearance. Her lavish outfits were often made from thrift store finds, gifts from friends, and items she found on the street. She also created more elaborate crowns and fresh flowers. Marcia's life was dramatically changed when she found herself near the Stonewall Inn at the early hours of June 28, 1969. That night, police officers raided a gay bar. As the officers began to arrest people for violating various discriminatory laws, the patrons of the Stonewall fought back. While there are many conflicting stories about the uprising's start, it is clear that Marcia was at the front lines. In one account, she started the uprising by throwing a shot glass at a mirror. In another, she climbed a lamppost and dropped a heavy purse onto a police car, shattering the windshield. Young trans women like Marcia were particularly vocal that night because they felt they had nothing left to lose. Their rage was not just about the police. It was about the oppression and fear they felt every single day. Marcia lived a life of poverty and danger. She was arrested over 100 times. She believed no one should hustle or live on the streets, but she never knew any other way to survive. In 1990, she contracted AIDS. She spoke publicly about it and told people she hoped they would not be afraid of those who had the disease. She was killed in 1992, and her case is still unsolved. The Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. Since their first appearance in San Francisco in 1979 on Easter Sunday, the sisters have devoted themselves to community service, ministry, and outreach, and to those on the edges, and to promoting human rights, respect for diversity, and spiritual enlightenment. And we heard from two amazing sisters from Vancouver, Sister Diversity Reigns and Sister Bear It All, and I was inspired by them and their stories. They use humor and irreverent wit to expose the forces of bigotry, complacency, and guilt that chain the human spirit. Sisters have orders all over the world. I remember meeting the sisters from San Francisco in 2019 at the Inside Out LGBTQ+ Film Festival because they had a short film about the history of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence at the film festival. And I just remember being totally inspired by these incredible people and what they do and their mission in the world. Jose Sarria. Jose Julio Sarria, born in 1922 and died in 2013, was a drag performer, politician, and community leader. After serving in the Second World War and dropping out of college because of a solicitation arrest that made it impossible for him to work as a teacher, Sarria became a cocktail waiter at the Black Cat Cafe, a bohemian bar with a largely gay clientele. Then he became locally famous for his opera parodies and his outspoken gay pride. He ended each performance with a song that says, "God save us Nelly Queens." In 1961, Saria ran for San Francisco Board of Supervisors, the first LGBTQ plus person to run for office in the United States. And in 1965, he founded the Imperial Court System, a queer charitable organization known for the elaborate courtly titles and pageantry adopted by its members. Taking his name from fellow San Francisco icon Joshua Norton, a 19th century eccentric who in 1859 declared himself Emperor of the United States and Protector of Mexico, Saria adopted the court persona of Empress Jose I, the Widow Norton. Bob the Drag Queen. Bob is a prominent activist known for protesting injustice and advocating for LGBTQ+ and Black communities. Their activism includes co-founding Queer Rising, staging drag queen protests in New York City to fight for marriage equality, and speaking out against racial and social injustices. Remember when we talked about Marsha dropping a large purse on the police car and breaking the windshield? That's the first purse first, and now we have Bob, purse first. They used their platform as a comedian, actor, and television host to advocate for representation and amplify marginalized voices. Bob co-founded the group Queer Rising around 2008-2009, which stayed protested like drag queen weddings and traffic blockades in Times Square until marriage equality was achieved in New York State. Bob was on the first season of the HBO TV series We're Here that traveled around the American states that had banned drag. The show found a person in each community who could be healed through drag. Whether it was a person who had hid his sexuality in Florida, or the dad in Alabama who wanted to support his transgender child and didn't know how to do it. Bob uses their visibility to advocate for representation, especially for Black queer people in media. They noted that seeing other queer people of color on TV can make a big difference for those who feel alone. Bob has been inspired by other activists like Sister Roma, who uses activism through humor and direct action. And so I wanted to end my time with you today by sharing a poem by R.R. Tavares from the book Drag Queen Preacher. It's called The Lipstick Revolution. Receive the kiss of the good sis, the Holy Spirit. Then go and do likewise. Kiss the forehead of the forgotten, then pound the pavement in a public place. Make it hold every bit of your weight. What did I say? Strut through the eye of this needle. This urban valley is your runway. We, the revolutionaries, marked with a kiss. Follow behind as champions. Follow the good sis. Her name, his and yours, is resilience. Thank you for being here on this whirlwind exploration of drag as a form of protest. There are many more stories that can be discovered, and I encourage you to discover them. So if there's any questions, happy to answer any. Well, thank you for being here. And I hope you go to the next couple of sessions, max at 7 o'clock our time, at 7 o'clock Eastern. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your time at the Dragon Spirituality Summit. And thank you so much for being here.